We are in week 8 of the Jesus story, where we are journeying through the Gospel of John. We've come to chapter 4. And unfortunately for you guys, I have no time this morning for funny jokes or off-color illustrations or anything like that. I did all that in the beginning. So we're going to jump right in. So turn with me to your Bibles to John chapter 4, and I want to just remind us where we're at. We have just come off Jesus having a conversation with the Pharisee Nicodemus, the high council. He's the upper echelon of the Jewish order. He came to Jesus at night. He came for a conversation with Jesus to ask about Jesus, what he's doing. It was deeply theological. Jesus referenced some Old Testament stories. We look back upon that, and then last week we saw John the Baptist and Jesus in this competition that John the Baptist kind of quashed. He's like, well, I'm not in competition. He's greater, I'm less. And so that's where we're at today. And so let's jump in to the conversation that Jesus has with the woman at the well. So turn with me to your Bibles. John chapter 4, verse 1, it says, Now Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard that he was gaining and baptizing more disciples than John. So that references back last week's story where they came to John's disciples and said, hey, dude, listen, this guy over there, his name's Jesus, he's getting more people coming to him. What's up with that? Don't you have a problem with that? And although, in fact, it was not Jesus who baptized, but his disciples. So verse 3 says, So he left Judea and went back once more to Galilee. So he left Judea, which is down in Jerusalem, and then he's going to Galilee, which is kind of northeast of Jerusalem, but more north than it is east, if you understand this. And then verse 4, it says, Now he had to go through Samaria. Now, here's the thing. I love how the author, John, puts, and he says, he had to go through Samaria. The fact of the matter is, he did not had to go through Samaria. And as a matter of fact, Jesus was a Jew, and Jews didn't go through Samaria. Let me ask you this. How many of y'all, if you had to go to Atlanta today, and if you do have to go to Atlanta today, we'll be down here later, we can pray over you. But if you had to go to Atlanta today, what would be your route? Like my route would be get out here on the highway, 365, right? Drive south, 985, 85. If maybe you got to go 285, but if you got to go to Atlanta, you're going to go, right? You're going to go 365, 985, 85, and then eventually it's going to merge into 85, 75 together right there at the downtown connector, and you're going to be in Atlanta. If you were a Jew and you said you had to avoid Samaria, so let's just take this let's say you had to avoid Gwinnett County, which wouldn't be bad all in itself if you had to avoid the traffic there, right? But if you, so here's what you would do. Your route would be then one of two ways. You would either go Dahlonega, right? Maybe over to Dahlonega. Maybe even you'd go up to Young Harris and go over to Blue Ridge and come 575 down to 75, and then you'd eventually get to 75, 85. Or maybe you're going to go over like through Commerce and then down through Athens and then all the way down to like Madison and hit 20 and come over and this was what you would have done this would have been your normal route if you were a Jew in this day, because you did not go through Samaria. And the reason why is Jews and Samaritans didn't like each other. Some 1,000 years before this, the Israelites were exiled out of Israel, and they had to go to, which was then Babylon. And they did that, and then there was a remnant that stuck around in northern Israel. And what ended up happening was this remnant started intermarrying with other people who were not of the same religion. And they would intermarry, and then they would intermarry, and then they would adopt parts of other religions to bring into their own and call it truth. Now, Samaritans only believed the first 5 books of the Bible, which is called the Pentateuch. They only believed, and then they believed once that ended, that God quit speaking. So they wouldn't believe in the prophecies. They wouldn't. King David, who cares? Like all the songs that he wrote, all the prophets, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, all these prophets, and so they wouldn't believe any of that. They would believe like Moses, and that's it. The first 5 books that Moses wrote, and that's it. Now, here's the thing. we don't call this a religion, we call that a cult. And this is what the Samaritans believed. So the Jews were like, we're not going to have this. We're not going to even associate with you. We're not going to talk to you. And this rift started when Nehemiah came back to Jerusalem from Babylon, started rebuilding the wall, and this remnant, the Samaritans who had intermarried, started to come back in to Jerusalem and say, hey, can we help? And Nehemiah says, no, you've turned your back on God. We're not going to allow you to do that. You don't get to just come in free and clear. So it created this tension between the nation of Israel and these Samaritans. So they created their own place. And it was just north of Jerusalem, between Jerusalem and Galilee. And so here's the deal. It was about a 3-day journey to go through Samaria. From Jerusalem to the Sea of Galilee. It's about a 3-day journey. It added 3 more. It's a 6-day journey to go around. You must really hate somebody to add 3 days to your journey. Like, if you told me you were going to have to go through, like, Blue Ridge to get to Atlanta, I would really have to hate Gwinnett County to not take 985, 85. Like, but that's how, this was this rift that they had. And so Jesus, his option as a Jew was to go around Samaria. But he didn't feel that way. John says he had to go through Samaria because he had a divine appointment with an image bearer of the Father. Not someone who was looked down upon, not someone who they thought was only half good, not someone who didn't bear the same skin tone as him, but someone who he said was made in the very image of the Father, a daughter of the Most High. So let me ask you this morning, what do you have to do? What's the one thing that God is telling you to do that you keep trying to go around? What's the one thing that God is telling you to do that you keep trying to go around the long way? Maybe it's share the gospel with a friend or invite someone to church, or maybe God is starting to call you to be generous, or maybe he's starting to call you to serve somewhere. I can tell you, every time God calls you to something, to have to go somewhere, there will always be an exit sign for a bypass. There will always be a 285 to go around the city. There's always a wider path that says go around Samaria. But there's also this road, this narrow road that leads to bumper-to-bumper traffic. As frustrating as that might be sometimes, it's a step of obedience that God is saying, keep coming this way. Verse 5, so he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. It was about noon. Now, there's 2 things here that I think are really important. The first one is, John is reminding us here of Jesus' humanity. Remember back in chapter 1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. He became a human. And so John is reminding us of Jesus' humanity in this moment. Let me ask you this. What do you think about when you think of Jesus? Like when I say, think of Jesus, what do you think about? Some of us probably think of like the cross or Easter Sunday. We probably think of, maybe some of us think of like the miracles that he did. Maybe some of that. If you go to Google and you just type in Jesus, he's going to bring up a nice little Swedish boy with blonde highlights, and he's got a pretty nice figure and all this other stuff, and that's not it. But I doubt many of us, when we think of Jesus as tired. Do we? Like, I don't think that registers in our mind, but that's what Jesus was right here. He was in a region he was not supposed to be in. He was in a city that he was supposed to avoid. And we're about to see he starts talking to a person that he should not have been talking to, according to customs. And let me tell you, that's good news for all of us. It's really good news because the real Jesus, a real human, came and lived a real life. He died on a real cross. And we're about to see he talks to a person and he sits with the worst of the worst. The perceived person who was the worst of the worst. Have you ever thought about this? Think about just like everybody in this room right now or watching online. One of y'all is the worst in here. Don't start looking at your spouse sitting next to you. But one of us is the worst in here, aren't we? Like just going off of what we know, somebody in here has to be the worst. I got my ideas who it might be. If I had to guess, it's probably this guy that's up here. Like if I had to start drawing straws, but someone in here is the worst of the worst. And what Jesus is showing us in this story is that he is willing to come and sit with the worst. Whoever that might be, whoever the perceived worst might be. And I'll tell you why it's this way. It says, when a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" His disciples had gone into town to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "You are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink?" For Jews did not associate with Samaritans. Now, I already told you that Jews and Samaritans didn't like each other. But don't miss this, because this is actually the first time that we see Jesus initiating conversation with someone else. All the other ones, right? You go back to the disciples in the first part of John. Like they come to him, "Rabbi, can we follow you?" In John 2, when Jesus turns water into wine, Jesus' mother comes to him and says they've run out of wine. Like she initiates conversation with him. This is the first time that he initiates conversation with someone else by asking her, "Can you give me a drink?" And he gave the same access to this woman at the well that he gave Nicodemus, the high-ranking Jewish official. They're complete opposites in everything that they are. One of them's a man, one of them's a woman, right? That's pretty obvious. One of them's a Pharisee, who's the high order of the Jewish people. Like he was a scholar. He would have known the entire Old Testament backwards and forwards. Like Jesus, like that would have been someone like Jesus, like he's in his wheelhouse right there. And this woman was a nobody from a nowhere. You know why Jesus did this? What he's stating to us is that the gospel, he himself is for all people. And her questions to Jesus, I think we read this sometimes and she's kind of like, "Why are you asking me for a drink? I'm a woman and a Samaritan at that." I don't think they were forceful or vindicative or to be read as snarky in any way. I'm not a tenderhearted person, so I have a hard time reading it tenderhearted, but I think she was asking him in a tenderhearted way and politely reminding him, "Sir, it's really culturally inappropriate for you to talk to me, and it's really even like it's not good for us to be together. So if you could just kind of stay over there, I'll just do my thing and then I'll be on my way, because I don't want to draw any attention. I don't want anybody to start asking questions." But the fact that, remember, what time was it? It was noon. The fact that she was coming to the well at noon tells us a lot about her. Tells us a lot about where she's at in society. You see, women and children were responsible in that day for getting the water back to your house. So they would have to come to a well to get the water. But normally, you don't go to a well at the hottest part of the day, in the desert, because it's hot. right? A couple weeks ago, well, not a couple weeks, well, I guess it was a couple weeks ago now, since it's Sunday, but my wife comes to me and I'm eating dinner. We're having lasagna, and she says, don't eat too much. You have to go run with me in a little while. And if y'all know me, I don't run. I might run to the bathroom. I might run to the refrigerator, but I don't run for fun. And so I did what every good husband does. I said, yes, ma'am. And so we went and ran, and I was like, why don't you run earlier, like before dinner? She goes, it's hot. I was like, well, you sweat more when it's hot. You lose more weight when it's hot. She goes, yeah, but it's hot. Because you just don't, like unless you really hate yourself, like you're not going to run in the hottest part of the day. You're going to run when it's cooler in the morning or at night. And so this woman is coming to this well in the heat of the day. I know why. You're going to find out why. The reason why, she was sick and tired of everyone talking about her. She was sick and tired. Maybe when she came to the well, it was like an episode of Mean Girls, and they were all like sharing their prayer request about her. Man, will you just pray for sister? She's just struggling, you know. She's got like all this stuff going on, and just keep praying for her. Y'all ever been around those prayer requests? Where they just, they gossip, and we do it under the form of prayer requests. Maybe she was tired of that. And so this entire encounter with Jesus and this woman is very, very scandalous and goes against all norms of the culture. And there's also the significance of the well. You may not know this, but in the Old Testament, there's a lot of things that happen around the well. Abraham sent his servant to find his son Isaac a wife. And that's where, at a well, is where Abraham's servant found his son Isaac a wife. Jacob, who was Isaac's son, found his wife at a well. Moses found his wife at a well. And I know what you're thinking. Well, where's this well? That's not today's sermon. We'll get that's a different thing. But there's so much significance around the well in that Jesus is about to teach her about water and about himself. And it's a true testament that Jesus breaks all boundaries to reach anyone and everyone. And that Jesus will sit face to face with the worst of the worst, the most vile person, whether it's true or whether it's just perceived by the culture and the society. Jesus will break all norms to come after you and to come after me. And so what I would tell you is this: welcome to the well. Folks, that's what church is supposed to be. It's supposed to be the well, the place where Jesus meets you no matter what, no matter when, and no matter how. Look what Jesus said back to her in verse 10. He said, Jesus answered her, if you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water. Now, I love this about Jesus because he did it with Nicodemus. He did it with others. He did it with the disciples. They all talk about, remember Nicodemus, Jesus tells you got to be born again, and Nicodemus goes, it's like, my poor mom, right? And she's like, my mom couldn't handle that. And so like he does this again, like people start talking natural. Jesus always goes to the supernatural. He always goes to the bigger. And he tells her, look, I'm bigger than anything you can imagine. Verse 11, sir, the woman said, you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water? I love it, because she doesn't know who she's talking to yet, right? All the disciples, they took all the supplies with them into the city, like they don't have anything. He's just chilling by himself. He's tired, he's sitting down. And here she goes, back to the natural. Verse 12, are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did also his sons and his livestock? Jesus answered, everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give them will become in them a spring of water welling up to eternal life. In other words, if you continually go to the things of this world for satisfaction, you will never be satisfied. If you continue to try to just drink natural water, you're going to get thirsty again. You will not be satisfied. until you drink from his cup. I think there's a message for all of us living in this great country. Because we search and 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 we search for the things that will satisfy us. You may have heard this. Tom Brady, if you don't know who Tom Brady is, he was a quarterback in the NFL, won I don't know how many Super Bowls. He's probably got enough to last his 10 hands, his 10 fingers and 10 toes. I don't know. But after his third Super Bowl, he says, I don't know, there still feels like there's something missing. He's got all the money in the world. He had a supermodel wife. He says there's still something missing. I can tell you, Tom, what is missing. It's not bigger homes. It's not a better job. It's not more friends. It's not a really good spouse. It's not really good kids. Those will not satisfy you. This world, the Bible says it offers us three things. It offers us the pride of life, the lust of the flesh, and the lust of the eyes. Those are the three traps that we all fall into. I call it the merry-go-round of normality, right? Just shut up and do your job. You know what your job is as a person? Work for the weekend. You ever heard that song by Loverboy? No, they're wrong. Because if we're working just for the weekend, we're doing it wrong. The merry-go-round of normality, right? Wake up, brush your teeth, take a shower, drink your coffee, go to work, come home, eat dinner, watch TV, go to sleep. The next day, wake up. Just repeat. Wash, rinse, repeat every day. That's the merry-go-round of normality, and we fall into it every single day. The pride of life. What does it say? If I can just get people to like me, I can just have more friends. If I can just get more likes on my Instagram page or maybe my Facebook post, man, people will like me. And we seek that and we want satisfaction and justification for what we do in that. And it just doesn't satisfy us. The lust of the eyes. What does it say? If I can just get more. I call that the cul-de-sac of stupidity. Because it really is stupid. Because I fall into that trap many times. Well, if I just get this, then I'll be happy. And then the lust of the flesh. And what does it say? If I can feel a certain way. If I can feel a certain way. And look, this doesn't, we say lust and we automatically think one thing, but look, there's a lot of things that fall into that category. Food. If I can just eat enough, I'll be satisfied. Well, we all know what? We're all going to go eat right after this, and about 3 or 4 hours from now, our mind's going to start thinking, what's for dinner? Because it never truly satisfies. Alcohol, if I can numb my pain away this week. Pornography, or here's one maybe you haven't thought about. If I can just look a certain way. If I can look good in front of the mirror. So what do? We spend all our waking hours going to the gym. I told y'all I don't run. But we spend all these hours just trying to look good in front of the mirror when we realize, hey, that's not a bad goal, but it will never truly satisfy us. The only well that will satisfy us is the well that Jesus offers. That's living water. Let's keep going. Verse 15, it says, the woman said to him, Sir, give me this water so that I will not get thirsty and have to keep coming here to draw water. What is she saying, right? She's saying, Jesus, I want this. I want this. I don't want to come to the well anymore. I don't want to have to come at noon. I don't want to have to be shameful of this. I want the living water, so I don't. Give me what you're offering, Jesus. What is she doing? If we were to say this in church today, what would we call this? She is giving her life to Jesus. She is becoming a Christian. She is accepting Jesus in her heart, however we want to say it. And most of us would stop the story here and rejoice and be happy. The angels are rejoicing, right? That's what the Bible says, that when one sinner gives their heart to Jesus, that the angels in heaven rejoice. Like we would stop here and we'd start doing our little, charismatic jig, and we'd be like, woo, somebody got saved today. But Jesus doesn't stop. Look what he says. And this is where it gets good. Verse 16 says, he told her, go call your husband and come back. Verse 17, I have no husband, she replied. Jesus said to her, "You're right when you say you have no husband. The fact is, you've had 5 husbands, and the man the man you now have is not your husband. What you have said is quite true." You see, Jesus starts digging and he gets personal. It's great. Gave your life to Jesus. Awesome. It's not enough to pray a prayer. To receive Jesus into your heart. Jesus says, no. I want you to go get that thing. I want you to go back. I want you to take that yoke that's around your neck. I want you to bring it back here. The thing that shames you from being around people. The reason why you're here at noon and not in the morning when all the other people are coming. That thing you're trying to hide. The thing that says and whispers in your ear to be ashamed of. What he's saying is go back and get it and bring it out into the light. Now, understand, we don't know what's happened to the other 5 men in her life. So before we start casting doubt and shame upon this woman, we don't understand because it doesn't say what happened. She could have been widowed 5 times for all we know. We don't know. But here's what we know. In that culture, she could not divorce the man. The man had to divorce the woman. So maybe she chose wrong and chose 5 deadbeats. That's possible. But what we do know is whether she was widowed or whether she was divorced 5 times, something was in her past that kept her from taking that next step on the 6th one. And she was saying, I don't want to go through that again. I don't want to deal with that again. So we'll just shack up together. Let's don't be dumb. They were living together, okay? So they can just shack up together and be fine. And Jesus is saying, that's not okay. Go get them. Bring them out into the light. Let me ask you this. What are you trying to hide from Jesus? And how's it going for you? I can tell you he knows. Whatever it is. You see, God's sending his son to be our penance on the cross was not just so we don't go to hell one day. That's an amazing benefit of it. I'll clarify that. But the reality is, the gospel came to us in the form of Jesus so we could live in freedom and we didn't have to hide the things back in the town. The reason Jesus came is so that we can be free. So Jesus is saying, go get all your junk, all your trash in the back and bring it out here. Go get the things that are keeping you in chains, not change. So let me ask you, what do we need to go get? Go get the thing that the enemy keeps putting in your path. Quit playing dumb. Because that's what the woman started trying to do. Look what her response was. He says, verse 19, "Sir," the woman said, "I can see that you're a prophet." Well, duh, right? "Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you Jews claim that the place where we must worship is in Jerusalem." What did she do? She tried to deflect. See that? Jesus starts calling her on her stuff. She starts convicting her. Hey, go get your stuff. Bring it out here. Well, you see, there's this thing. When Jesus starts to dig into our lives, we have an intrinsic way of deflecting. Did y'all know that? Well, it's not that bad. Well, if you compare it to this guy over here, I'm doing pretty good. The problem is Jesus calls us to compare us. He tells us to compare our lives to his life. And when we start comparing it to his life, everything we do looks pretty bad. The book of Isaiah says that on our best day, our best righteous acts are filthy, filthy rags. Now, there's a literal interpretation from the Hebrew in that. that we won't go into today, but you can go do it on your own. Verse 21, the woman, Jesus replied. Now, this was also a tender-hearted way. Remember, Jesus, in John 2, he addressed his mother this way. So it's tender-hearted. It's not like, woman, what you talking about? It's more, woman, come on. He said, believe me, a time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know, for salvation is from the Jews. Not for the Jews, but from the Jews, meaning that it's him. I'm a Jew, and salvation is coming from me. Yet a time is coming, and has now come, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth, for they are the kind of worshipers that the Father speaks. God is spirit, and his worshipers must worship in spirit and in truth. Jesus is telling her, I came on a rescue mission for people like you. Jesus came on a rescue mission for people like me. Came on a rescue mission for us. He's saying, quit worrying about the mountains and the this and that. He goes, I'll move a mountain if I have to. And we still do this today, don't we? We try to get down into the weeds and start worrying about mountains and all this other stuff. When let's start worrying about our hearts. And let's go get the thing that keeps us from God. Verse 25, we got to move because we got to get all the way to verse 42. Verse 25, the woman said, I know that Messiah, called Christ, is coming. And when he comes, he will explain everything to us. And then here it comes, verse 26. Then Jesus declared, I, the one speaking to you, I am he. Now there are 7 statements in the Gospel of John that we'll get to eventually. They call them the 7 I am statements, where Jesus talks about, I'm the bread of life, I'm the way, the truth, and the life, and there's 5 others. But what Jesus is actually doing, remember, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. That's John 1. What Jesus is saying, that the same person that you would remember, you're a Samaritan, you know the Pentateuch, from Exodus 3, when Moses was introduced to God at the burning bush. When Moses asked God, when I go to Pharaoh and I say, let my people go, who should I say sent me? And God says, tell them I am sent you. That's what Jesus is saying here. And what she would have understood, what any Jew would have understood, is what Jesus is using is actually a tetragram. It's 4 letters. Because we read it as I am. But in the Hebrew, it's 4 letters. It's YHWH. And so what it was meant to signify in Hebrew was the word Yahweh. And it's breathing. So every time you breathe, this is cool. Every time you breathe, you are actually, doesn't matter who you are, whether you're a follower of Jesus or whether you're not, when you breathe, you are actually whispering the word God. You didn't know that, did you? How many times a day do you say God? Every breath. And what Jesus is telling her is, I am him. I am the Messiah. Verse 27 says, just then his disciples returned, and every time the disciples show up, they like ruin it, right? Like they just come in and it's like, man, you interrupted a really good conversation between the Samaritan woman and Jesus. I guess I can keep talking. It's raining, so y'all don't want to go out in this, so I'll just keep going. So the disciples returned and were surprised to find him talking with a woman. But no one asked, I love this, no one had the courage to ask, is what it really, I think, should say, what do you want, or why are you talking to her? And then verse 28, and I love this because you remember if you go back when Jesus called the disciples, James and John, and it talks about that they left their boat and their business and their dad immediately. I love this. It says, leaving her water jar. Now, a water jar was pretty important because it's how you got water, right? The woman went back to town and said to the people, verse 29, come see a man who told me everything I ever did. And I'm sure the people in the town was like, look, we don't need to go see a man who we know everything that you've done, lady. Like, we see it. It's not a secret. Could this be the Messiah? And then I probably think, they probably say, well, if he told you everything that you did, like, we got to go see this. So it says they came out of the town and made their way toward him. So this woman runs into town, runs into Sychar. She starts telling everybody about Jesus. There's this dude. He sat down. He was tired. He was thirsty. He asked me for water. And then he starts telling me all my past, all my junk. Like he starts doing all this and like we gotta go, y'all gotta go see him because he's like something else. But here's the funny thing, like, don't miss this. She goes into town no longer ashamed of her past. She walks into town and starts telling people, I don't care about what I've done. He's told me everything. He exposed it anyway, and so come. You see, because here's the truth of what we know. When you get John 3:16 inside of you, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish but have eternal life. John 3:17 starts to come out that there's no condemnation, that Jesus didn't come into this world to condemn you, that he came to save you. He removes the condemnation from your past. So she went back into town a free woman. Then it says in the meantime, or meanwhile, right here in verse 31, and I love this because he goes back to natural, supernatural here with his disciples. Meanwhile, the disciples urged him, Rabbi, eat something. But he said to them, I have food to eat that you know nothing about. Verse 33, then his disciples said to him, could someone have brought him food? Like, it was beyond their wildest dreams that he would have gotten or even thought of to ask the woman for a drink, or they didn't even go through their mind. And so they're thinking, someone must have come along and brought him food. And Jesus said, my food is to do the will of him who sent me and finish his work. Listen, the most satisfying thing to you and your soul and your body is to be obedient to the Father. Nothing else. And here Jesus goes deeper. They're still thinking natural. He goes deeper. Verse 35. Don't you have a saying? It's still 4 months until harvest. I tell you, open your eyes. Look at the fields. They're ripe for the harvest. Even now, the one who reaps draws a wage and harvests a crop for eternal life. So what he's saying is that the guy goes out there, he's still, though the harvest isn't fully come in yet, it's still ripe right now. And so you still go out and you get paid to go work the fields, even when it's not time for the harvest, so that the sower and the reaper may be glad together. Verse 37, thus the saying, one sows and another reaps is true. I sent you to reap what you've not worked for. Others have done the hard work, and you've reaped the benefits of their labor. This week, I was in Tennessee, and I had the opportunity to lead worship for a student camp up there. But Wednesday, I had the opportunity to kind of just encourage their leaders, their student leaders, because if you don't know, if you've ever done student ministry, it's not easy. And I told them that I think they have the hardest ministry in the church by far. The close second is kids ministry, but student ministry is the hardest because it's like they're not like they're students, right? They're teenagers. I don't want to say anymore. I don't get in trouble. I got 3 teenagers in my house. So, but I told them, like, you never know the impact you have down the road. You may never see the fruit of your labor. You may never see it. There was a Sunday school teacher back in the 1800s who just faithfully taught Sunday school. I've shared this story before. He just faithfully taught Sunday school. And he walked into a cobbler store one day, and there was a guy there who was selling shoes. And he just shared Jesus with this guy. And this guy's last name was Moody. And Moody went on to be one of the most famous evangelists ever. Moody Bible Institute in Chicago. Anybody ever heard of that? Moody Bible College. One of the guys that was under his tutelage, that was under his preaching, was a guy by the name of Horatio Spafford. That name ring a bell with anybody? Horatio lost one of his kids in a fire, in the Great Chicago Fire, and then he lost 4 of his daughters in a shipwreck out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, and they stopped there, and he wrote the song, It Is Well With My Soul. But go on beyond that. So under Moody's, he would go around preaching, and then he would share the gospel, and this guy would go get this guy, and this guy would go get this guy. Eventually, one of those guys was a baseball player who was told about Jesus, and this baseball player by the name of Billy Sunday. Anybody ever heard of Billy Sunday? Would go, and he would quit baseball and go start doing crusades, and he would start preaching the gospel, and then it would come along, and they would have crusades in Charlotte, North Carolina. And there was a young man at the age of 16 who would sit in the front row, and he would come to these crusades, and he would hear the gospel, and eventually the last night of the crusade, he responded to the gospel. 16 years old, gave his life to Jesus on the very last night of the crusade in Charlotte, North Carolina. That one person in the front row, because of a Sunday school teacher sharing the gospel to Moody in a shoe store, that person sitting in the front row by the name of Billy Graham gave his life to Christ, who many of us are probably affected by his teaching today. Going all the way back to a Sunday school teacher. And what Jesus is saying to the disciples, I'm giving you a harvest you didn't even work for. And I sometimes feel that way as a pastor. Like people come to Jesus, people come, like they get baptized, and it's like my teaching is usually nowhere in their story. Like me talking, it's always someone else. It's always one of you. And so you never know the impact you're having on someone's life. I said this a couple weeks ago. A friend of mine, we went to Israel with him. Melissa and I went to Israel with him. Lifelong friend, and we've been friends since like the 7th grade, 8th grade. He says this. He says that the gospel was on its way to someone else when it stopped by my door. You never know the impact you might have many years from now because of the work of being faithful to what God has called you to do. Look what ended up happening in verse 39. Many of the Samaritans from that town believed in him because of the woman's testimony. He told me everything I did. So when the Samaritans came to him, they urged him to stay with him. And he stayed 2 days longer. Did you catch that? He kept staying in a town that he wasn't supposed to be in, that were the misfits. And because of his words, many more became believers. They said to the woman, we no longer believe just because of what you said. Now we have heard for ourselves, and we know that this man really is the Savior of the world. Ladies and gentlemen, who needs to hear your story? Who needs to hear your story? Because you all have one. You all have a story. And I know some of us think, well, my story is not as good. And we talk about this in Connect Track. Like we try to compare my testimony with their testimony. And we think, well, he's got a really good testimony. I'm just over here. I've been growing up in church. I did this. I did that. You have a story to tell. One of the things I shared with those youth leaders this week was this. Don't ever lose sight of who you are. We have a tendency in the church to forget who we are. Jesus is looking for three types of people, or the people Jesus is looking for is the title of my sermon. He's looking for three types of people. He's looking for the outsider. He's looking for the outsider. I'm not talking about Pony Boy or Dally or anybody like that. I'm talking about he's looking for the misfits, the people on the outside, the people that we, and before we think, well, that's not me. Unless you don't have anything that you can go get, you're right, that's not you. But last time I checked, we all got stuff. He's looking for the outsider. He's looking for the sinner. Once again, we all fit into this category. And the third thing he's looking for is just someone to invite her. He's looking for an inviter. And that's what this Samaritan woman was. You know, there's so many different theological angles of this story. But I just want to just face value. Let's look at this. An outsider, a sinner, and just someone to say, this guy told me everything I did. He didn't care that I'd been with had 5 husbands and was living with a guy now that wasn't my husband. He didn't care about all that. All he said was just go get it. Bring it out into the light. Give it to him. And I think too often we forget that we are the outsider. We are the sinner. And we can be the inviter. Just by sharing your story. So this morning, I want to invite you. The band's going to come back up. We're going to sing one more song. I want to invite you this morning to go back and get whatever it is that keeps you. Whatever it is that traps you. And before we think, well, I don't struggle with this, or quit trying to think what we don't struggle with. And let's go to what it is that we need to go get. And let's go get it. And let's bring it to Jesus. Don't let the enemy lie to you in these moments. Don't try to circumvent or justify what we're doing with theological statements. Right? Go get that relationship. Go get your thoughts. Go get your anxiety. Go get your image. Go get your temper. Go get your pride. Go get your doubt. Go get that alcohol. Go get that pornography addiction. Go get that affair. Go get it and bring it to Jesus. Bring it out into the light. Whatever it is. Don't take the exit ramp today. Go through Samaria. Jesus had to go through Samaria. Jesus had to go through Samaria. What do you have to go through today? Where is it that you have to go? Father, today we thank you. God, I thank you for these moments, for these times that we can be open, we can be honest, we can be real. So, Father, I pray right now, more than anything, God, I pray right now against the spirit of justification in our lives. We'll justify it in any way that we can think. So Jesus, open our hearts, open our lives. Father, this morning we worship you. Let's stand together. And we're going to sing this song called Waymaker. Because we're believing God to make a way, to make a path, to open our hearts. So I want to invite you this morning. I want to invite you this morning to open your life to Jesus, to go get what it is that keeps you. Bring it to him. Let's sing together.